Hook, in the frigid darkness of a stone chamber buried deep underground, a lone torch flickers on the wall, casting trembling, ghostly shadows. A young girl, barely 18, writhes on the icy floor, her wrists bound tightly to an iron stake. Her black hair hangs in tangled strands across her pale face, eyes wide and glistening with terror and despair. Her screams echo, not in words, but in raw, primal sounds of pain and helplessness, mingling with the steady drip of water from the jagged ceiling above. Beside her stands an aged friar, gaunt beneath a heavy black robe, his weathered face hidden in the darkness of a cowl. In his hand, he holds a small glass vial, shimmering under the weak torchlight, releasing a pungent, suffocating scent, part wild mint, part burning resin. Tilting the vial, he lets its contents fall drop by drop onto the girl's trembling body, seeping through her torn garments, spreading across her skin. They call it aqua benedicta carnis, the holy water of the flesh, a sacrament the church claims can purge demons and purify the soul. But its true purpose is far more sinister. Made from wild mint, pine resin, and laurel oil, the concoction doesn't cleanse. It inflames. It quickens the heart, sends blood surging hot through the veins, awakens urges buried deep within, driving the victim beyond her own control. The girl trembles violently now, sweat glistening on her brow, breath ragged and uneven. Even bound, her body jerks as though locked in battle with an unseen force. Her terrified eyes scan the chamber and meet the gaze of men standing in the shadows, friars, guards, men cloaked in the authority of God. They do not look upon her with pity. Their stares carry something colder, tinged with curiosity. And beneath the thin veneer of righteousness, something darker still. Her screams weaken. In their place, faint whimpers break the silence, not cries of pain, but sounds born of something she cannot name, sensations that humiliate and strip her dignity more brutally than the ropes biting into her flesh. This scene, as cruel as it is, was not rare in the Middle Ages. It was part of rituals sanctioned and celebrated, cloaked in the name of purification. Yet a question lingers, heavy in the air. Was this truly a holy rite, or a sophisticated act of torture? A divine attempt to save souls, or a weapon forged to degrade and control women? Why did the medieval world enshrine punishments like this into law? Was it religion, justice, or simply the primal hunger to dominate? The historical roots of torture. Historical setting: France, mid-15th century. The 15th century in France was a time of turmoil when the wounds of the 100 Years' War, 1337 to 1453, still bled openly. The nation lay exhausted, villages reduced to ash, crops failed, and ordinary people lived in constant fear of war, of plague, and of unseen forces they believed to be the work of the devil himself. In this bleak landscape, the Catholic Church, closely entwined with the nobility, stood as the sole source of spiritual refuge, yet it also wielded its power as a formidable tool of social control, and its weapon was not the sword, but fear. Women, particularly those who lived on the fringes of society, became the easiest targets. Midwives, herbal healers, or young women who dared to live independently and defy male authority were branded as threats. Rooted in the doctrine of original sin, the church preached that women were vessels of temptation, inherently weak and easily manipulated by demonic forces. A woman who understood medicine, who knew her own body or the secrets of herbs, was often accused of witchcraft, a charge deliberately vague, yet sufficient to condemn her to death. Among the arsenal of tortures, aqua benedicta carnis stood out as a particularly cruel method. This so-called holy water, brewed from wild mint, pine resin, and laurel oil, didn't just irritate the skin, it struck at the nervous system. When applied, it made the victim shudder violently, her heart race, her face flush red, and in some cases, provoked involuntary physical reactions of deep humiliation. Under the guise of purification, this concoction stripped women of their dignity, forcing them to confess to sins they had never committed. This system was not born solely of religion. It was a collision of superstition, political power, and the primal instinct of a patriarchal society to dominate. Women, armed with knowledge, independence, and the quiet threat of defiance, became casualties of an order desperate to crush any challenge to its rule. The Secret Trials of Arras. February-March, 1459, Arras, France. In the winter of 1459, the northern French city of Arras lay under a pall of fear. Secret heresy trials, organized by the church and backed by the local nobility, had become a waking nightmare for anyone accused. The charges were often so vague they bordered on the absurd. She has cat-like eyes. She speaks strange words in her sleep. Her hands smell of herbs. Such baseless claims were enough to drag a woman from her home and lock her in the dungeons. Elena, a 17-year-old orphan living with her aunt in a modest cottage on the outskirts of Arras, became one such victim. Her crime? Refusing the advances, or more accurately, the forced marriage proposal, of a nobleman's son. That single act of defiance branded her a witch. The accusation that she used sorcery to bewitch men. One cold night, guards stormed her home and dragged her away under the horrified gaze of her helpless aunt. In the depths of the prison, Elena faced the so-called trial of purity, a ritual of torture thinly veiled as a sacred rite. She was bound tightly to a frigid iron chair, ropes digging so deep into her wrists and ankles they bled. Presiding over the ordeal was Frère Jérôme, an aging friar with a lined, weary face. In his trembling hands, he held a vial of aqua benedicta carnis. Droplets fell onto Elena's shivering body as he muttered Latin prayers, the acrid scent filling the chamber, choking her lungs. Her body convulsed uncontrollably as he interrogated her. "Have you lain with the devil? Have you used magic to ensnare men?" Her cries echoed through the stone walls, blurring into his relentless questions. Frère Jérôme was not a man born cruel. Deep down, doubts gnawed at him. Was he truly serving God, or merely an instrument of a corrupt order? Yet the belief that he was saving her soul pushed him forward. After 3 days without food, without sleep, Elena, broken, exhausted, and humiliated, screamed out a confession. She admitted to sins she did not understand, let alone commit, and that was all the court needed. Her coerced words, torn from her by suffering, sealed her fate. The silence of history records destroyed, evidence forgotten. On March 16, 1459, more than 30 women, including Elena, were burned alive in the town square of Arras. The flames consumed their bodies and erased every trace of their existence. The trial records, the written accounts of their torture, were deliberately burned soon after to protect the honor of the church. Only a few fragmented lines in the diary of the Saint-Dominique monastery remain, briefly mentioning a purifying water that strips reason as a commonly used instrument. The few women who survived, if any, were silenced under threat of death. Should they dare to speak, their words would be branded as the whispers of Satan himself. The system did not merely punish their flesh, it smothered their voices, ensuring that these crimes would sink into the dark recesses of forgotten history. That same system preached, "Women must remain silent, for their words may belong to Satan." Yet within that silence, the screams of Elena and thousands like her still echo faintly through the centuries, a haunting reminder of an age when power, religion, and the primal hunger to dominate combined to crush the innocent. A modern awakening. On a misty morning in 2023, Louise R., a young Gen Z historian, stepped into the archives of an abandoned monastery on the outskirts of Arras, France. The air was damp and heavy, with the smell of aged paper and dust clinging to decaying wooden shelves. With her short, teal-dyed hair and round glasses, Louise was hardly the image of a traditional historian, but she carried an unshakable intuition. what her professors had once dismissed as an unnecessary obsession with history's forgotten voices. In a shadowed corner, beneath decades of dust, Louise uncovered a small 15th-century oak panel painting, chipped and weathered by time. The scene it depicted was haunting. A young girl, eyes wide with agony, screaming on a stone floor, wrists tightly bound. Beside her stood a friar, glass vial in hand, his expression cold, yet conflicted. The painting bore no signature, no title, yet it whispered from the past, a silent testimony long buried. Louise's heart pounded. She knew she had stumbled upon something significant. Back at the Sorbonne, where she was completing her PhD dissertation, Louise presented her discovery to her advisor, Pierre Dubois, an esteemed but rigid scholar. He dismissed the painting with a wave of his hand. "History does not need sensational tales, Louise," he said, his tone patronizing. "The Church acted in the interests of order. Do not unearth what was meant to be buried." But Louise refused to stop. Driven by a need for truth, she contacted other historians, scoured archives across France, and even Vatican collections, until finally she unearthed a hand-copied manuscript of a 15th-century torture manual hidden in a small Brussels library. Though only a copy, the manuscript contained chillingly detailed accounts of aqua benedicta carnis and its use in heresy trials. The crude ink scrawls described friars dripping the concoction onto victims' flesh, observing their reactions, and recording their coerced confessions as proof of guilt. One name appeared again and again: Elena, the 17-year-old girl tortured in 1459. As Louise read line after line, her chest tightened. She saw Elena's face in her mind, no different from the girl in the painting, and asked herself, how could humans do this to one another? Armed with these findings, Louise launched a social media campaign demanding the release of all hidden records of the Arras trials. She wrote articles, posted videos, and shared the image of the painting, capturing the attention of thousands, young scholars, feminists, and activists alike. But with recognition came backlash. Local church representatives branded her a blasphemer, accusing her of smearing sacred history. Anonymous threats flooded her inbox, yet Louise refused to yield. Determined, she organized a small public exhibition in Arras, displaying the painting and the recovered documents. At the event, she called for a memorial to honor the 30 women burned alive, including Elena. Standing before the audience, voice steady but impassioned, she declared, they were not merely victims. They were people, with names, with stories, and it is our responsibility to restore their dignity. The story of Elena and the 30 women of Arras is not just a dark chapter of history, it is a powerful reminder of truth and courage. If you were Elena's father, Isabeau's lover, or Claudine's mother, women humiliated under the guise of purifying the soul, what would you do? Would you remain silent or rise to demand justice? Stay tuned for the next chapter where we uncover a witch trial in Germany, where even pregnant women were tortured simply for dreaming of angels. Hit the bell so you won't miss it.